So, Cat Chaser from 1989, directed by the great Abel Ferrara and based upon the novel by Elmore Leonard. So the movie stars Peter Weller, who is in the lead role. He stars as George Moran. Peter Weller's character, George, is a former Marine from a platoon called Cat Chaser, hence the title of the film. And he basically fought in the Dominican Civil War in the 1960s. The movie kind of depicts that at the very beginning, but the actual main start of the film begins with George, who's now running a hotel in Miami. It's worth mentioning that Peter Weller filmed this movie in between RoboCop and RoboCop 2. This was his biggest point in his career, just coming off the back of RoboCop. Huge film, huge success, the first movie. I like to, when I watch movies, I like to kind of remember where actors, place them where they were in their career at that point. And this was Peter Weller's most popular point in his career. We also have Kelly McGillis playing the love interest, Mary. Now, I'm not too familiar with Kelly McGillis's acting. I did briefly check her filmography, and a lot of titles, a lot of projects that never heard of before. But in this movie, she plays a love interest, and I gotta say, she does pull off a great performance. It's strange because she's, I guess, this person trying to get away from her husband. The actress gives a good performance, and in terms of the chemistry between her and Peter Weller, I believed it. I thought it was pretty good. So as I said, the movie starts off with Peter Weller's character George running this hotel in Miami Beach. He gets a visit from this gangster, this big-time drug dealer called Beau, and from the dialogue exchange, we quickly understand that these two actually know each other. We don't know exactly the details, but it's alluded that these two have a past history. So Beau, this big gangster kingpin, he shows up at the hotel, on the beach. He's got his henchmen surrounded him, and he basically offers to buy the hotel from George. George declines and just goes on his way. Then we see George going back to the Dominican Republic, back to the place that he fought, where he and his former platoon, the Cat Chasers, went around and obviously battled various soldiers in the Dominican. So we have George wanting to retrace his steps when he fought in combat all those years before. Then he ends up coincidentally meeting Mary, who obviously is played by Kelly McGillis. She and him immediately reconnect and end up having an affair. All this time we find out that Mary is actually Beau's wife. So when we take a step back, we just had Beau show up at George's place wanting to buy the hotel. He declines and then ends up going to the Dominican Republic, meeting or bumping into Beau's wife, and then starting this affair. It all happens very quickly. There is obviously a lot of backstory that we are not privy to. We don't actually know. We just it's a lot of alluding, so to speak, and you kind of, as an audience, have to kind of join the dots. But obviously, from what I gather, George and Mary had some sort of past that they maybe wanted to get together years earlier. That's not really fleshed out for the audience. So they have this affair, they go back to Miami, and then we also have separately this subplot where a character called Jiggs, played by the late Charles Durning, he's this ex-cop gone rogue, so to speak, and he finds out that George, Peter Weller, is having an affair with Mary, Beau's wife, and he's going to use that information to blackmail George and blackmail Beau. This guy's just, he's gone rogue, he's a crook, you can't trust him. And Jiggs, he's basically in and out of the film, collecting information, and dishing out little threats here, little threats there, be careful, George, you never know what's around the corner, George, all these kind of subtle hints. But here, he played a very authentic piece of crap in terms of this guy Jiggs. So when we take a look back, we have a story where we've got an affair taking place between a wife of a drug dealer and this soldier, And then separately to that, we have this ex-cop who is basically trying to extort everyone and trying to get as much money as he can from this situation that he sees. I don't condone cheating. It's not good at all. And I guess this movie tries to portray it as, hey, you can't blame Mary because, she's involved with this crazy drug dealer and, he's got this henchman and, she wants out of the relationship, but she can't get out. And I guess she's always had this thing for Peter Weller's character, George. And now she's just had enough and she's like, no, what, I'm just going to go with this relationship, this affair. And I guess I do question, does she really love George? Did she ever really love George? Did she just see George as a route out, an exit point where, here comes George, he whisks me off my feet, literally, and I start this affair, and hey, if he ends up getting killed, he ends up getting killed. I don't know, it's like, I don't think Mary was trying to use George, but I do question her motives overall. So I've mentioned these two obviously have an affair, and we have a sex scene that takes place in the Dominican Republic very soon after the two characters meet. So I just want to make a point here that both Mary and George are laying on the bed, the camera's close up to the pair, and Mary's giving this explanation of how that she can't take this relationship that she has with Beau. She can't stand her husband and she wants out, and she's basically giving all this reasoning. So Mary's fed up, and as George is listening, he seems to be, he's cradling her breast the whole time in this maybe like two-minute scene where she's just giving this information. George says that he's getting aroused at one point at the end of this scene, and he's like, but it's weird because the information that she's saying is pretty important and it's not really sexual, this information that Mary is explaining. I don't know, I just thought it was a weird choice. It just seemed a little bit off, but I wanted to make that point anyway. So as I mentioned, this movie was directed by Abel Ferrara. I'm a huge fan of his work, especially his early work in the 80s and 90s. And Abel Ferrara had previously worked on Miami Vice a few years earlier. And I just noticing when I was watching this movie, a ton of ex-Miami Vice guest stars that appeared on the show. I mentioned the gangster kingpin Beau. He was played by actor Thomas Millian, who also appeared in the season 2 episode of Miami Vice, Bought and Paid For. He plays a gangster kingpin in that, so I don't know if he's typecast or whatever it is, but yeah. Separately to that, we also have Juan Fernandez, who has a small role in Cat Chaser. He gets caught up in some of the back and forth stuff going on between Beau and George and ends up getting killed by Beau. Juan Fernandez appeared in the season 5 episode of Miami Vice called Borrasca. So yeah, I'd seen that show, big fan of Miami Vice, and yeah, just seeing a lot of familiar faces, so to speak. At times I thought the music was pretty decent, especially in some of the somber, quieter moments of the movie. But even though I thought it worked well for the most part, at times it did overall have this very kind of low budget TV quality feel to it. And given this was a theatrical release, Cat Chaser, I'm surprised that there wasn't a better quality soundtrack produced for the film. I'm not too sure if filmmakers or whatever just run out of money, but they did the best they could, I guess. But watching this movie and listening to it, it definitely had a very kind of television movie type feel to it. I'm just going to just rattle off some dislikes here. The scene where Beau humiliates his wife, strips Mary naked, puts a gun to her mouth, and basically sexually assaults her. It was a dark scene. It did linger on a bit too much for me. I don't like those scenes in movies. I mean, it can happen. It's not so much it can't take place in a story or within a story, but sometimes when I talk about exploitation, these things just linger on. It's kind of unnecessary. Here, it got the point across that Beau was a psychopath. He's he's got a loaded gun, puts it in the mouth of his wife. He's threatening to shoot her. He's just, a guy that just wants control. And that's like a lot of guys in real life. These drug gangster kingpins, money's not enough for them. They want control. They want to be control of people. Beau was a terrible guy, and Mary did need to leave him. Going off on that though, when I think about it, there's no real likable characters in this movie. It's not necessarily people that I hate, but yeah, there's not really anyone you really kind of get behind. It's like, I don't hate Peter Weller's character George, but he does openly start an affair with a married woman. It's like, is that our hero? And things start to escalate when Beau suspects of George sniffing around his wife, and George puts himself and Mary in danger. And as it's going on, I'm thinking, yeah, what did you expect? It's like, you kick the hornet's nest. You're playing with fire there, messing around with someone's wife, especially who's a kingpin. Why are you doing that? So yeah, in a weird way, it's almost like Peter Weller's a bad guy as well. Not as bad as Beau, but he's not, a nice guy really. The actual ending of the movie, the very last scene, we have Mary and George hugging, they embrace, and they've basically got away with Beau's money. Beau is dead. Jiggs, who was trying to extort everyone, he's dead. And there's this kind of almost like fairy tale kind of ending, like, oh yes, the affair's over, now they're just, together. I don't know, she's able to swindle cash from her husband. He's a bad guy, we get it. I don't know, it just seems a little bit, there's a lot of unanswered questions as well, because we have at the very end Jiggs killing Beau and then attempting to kill George at the hotel. George kills him instead, and I get that, George is a former military soldier, he's got gun skills, totally get that works, but it just quickly kind of ends and they embrace, and they've got this money now from her husband, and that's it. Who knows what happens next? And I don't know, I think it just, in terms of the pacing and stuff, it just kind of ended very quickly. There was no real dialogue. After Jiggs was killed by George, you just cut to Mary, and she's looking, and oh my god, so dramatic, and then suddenly they're embracing, and that's the end of the film. So yeah, just how quickly it was wrapped up in terms of the timing. I wish there was more dialogue and more information alluding to what happens next, rather than them just kind of, hey, we've got this money now and let's just go off into the sunset. So that was my overall dislikes. I think it's also worth mentioning, when I was doing some research about this film before I watched it, I did read up that Abel Ferrara, the director, had some conflicts with Kelly McGillis, who played Mary. Now I think you've got to take it with a pinch of salt, because this was obviously reported many years ago. McGillis has said that she hated the experience, and Abel Ferrara really, put her under a lot of stress and then pressure and stuff like that. And I will say, as a fan of Abel Ferrara's work, I'm very familiar with his projects that he's released, and he's got a reputation of being kind of this wacky, kind of kooky guy, but overall, Abel Ferrara is not known to be one that has continuous conflicts with his actors. And just reading about that with Kelly McGillis, that was, it's quite surprising. So, in terms of rankings, I am going to rank the 1989 movie Cat Chaser a 5. Now, it's a decent movie, and there are some decent moments. Is it worth watching? I would say yes. If you're a Peter Weller fan, yes, absolutely, it's definitely worth watching. Other than Peter Weller, take him out of the equation, is this a good movie? I actually would say it's a bad movie without Peter Weller. Peter Weller just brings his natural kind of screen presence, and he does deliver. It can be an interesting story, but it just wasn't interesting enough. I think the pacing in it, at times, it's very boring. Even when I think about when Beau died, it was just so prolonged. You could easily just kill him, but I think it was like a 3 or 4 minute scene where he gets stripped naked, he gets into a shower, and it's just like, okay, that could have been cut, and there could have been other things, more interesting things going on. I'm not too sure how hampered production was during this time. I don't know what kind of issues were going on, if there was delays or whatever, or, reshoots, but it's a decent movie. Peter Weller is the best part of this film. Besides him, it's a pretty non-eventful movie. It's pretty non-eventful anyway, but some of the scenes are pretty decent. Peter Weller, though, other than that, this would be good. So the fact he is in this, I would recommend it. And if you guys have seen it, what you think of it. It's not an outstanding performance from Peter Weller, but the more I think of it, if it weren't for him kind of leading and basically carrying this movie on his shoulders, this would be a big fail. So yeah, props to Peter Weller.
Like, subscribe.